Long before borders divided our world, long before maps charted every coastline, there were those who dared to venture into the unknown, not as conquerors, but as carriers of culture. Picture this: a Phoenician trader unloading vibrant purple dyes onto a foreign shore, or a Sogdian merchant weaving tales of distant lands along the Silk Road. These were the unsung architects of our shared human story, their footsteps echoing across millennia, yet their names often lost to time. What if I told you that the languages we speak, the foods we savor, even the technologies we rely on today might trace back to these ancient wanderers? Their journeys weren't just about survival, they were the quiet revolutions that connected civilizations, sparking innovations we still benefit from. Think about the last time you marveled at a piece of intricate jewelry, savored a spice that tingled your tongue, or followed a melody that felt strangely familiar. Chances are you're touching fragments of a legacy left by these invisible threads of history. Archaeologists have unearthed pottery in Scandinavia bearing Mesopotamian designs, while linguistic detectives trace words like sugar and cotton back to Sanskrit travelers who carried them westward. These aren't just artifacts, they're whispers of a time when cultures didn't clash but collaborated, trading not just goods but ideas that shaped the modern world. So why does this matter now, in an age of instant global connection? Because these stories shatter the myth that migration is a modern crisis. It's actually humanity's oldest tradition. Every time we dismiss the stranger, we forget that the very foundations of our societies were built by outsiders who brought new perspectives, skills, and dreams to unfamiliar shores. Today, we're going to follow their faint footprints from the bustling ports of ancient Tyre to the windswept caravanserais of Central Asia. Together, we'll decode the clues they left behind, a shattered amphora here, a borrowed word there, and rediscover how these forgotten journeys still resonate in our lives. Ready to unravel the hidden chronicles of ancient immigrant cultures, let's begin where all great journeys do, with a single step into the unknown. Imagine a world without passports or checkpoints, where movement wasn't about crossing lines on a map but following the rhythms of trade winds and river currents. These ancient immigrants weren't just travelers, they were living bridges between worlds. Take the Phoenicians, for example, who sailed from modern-day Lebanon to as far as Spain, not with armies but with alphabets. Their script, adapted by the Greeks, became the foundation of the very letters you're reading now. Or consider the Bantu-speaking peoples of Africa, whose gradual migrations over centuries spread ironworking techniques and agricultural knowledge across the continent, reshaping societies without a single battle. What made these groups unique wasn't just their mobility but their role as cultural alchemists. A single shipwreck off the coast of Turkey tells this story vividly. Buried beneath the waves, archaeologists found a cargo of glassware from Egypt, spices from India, and coins from Athens, all on a vessel built in Phoenicia. This wasn't just trade, it was a floating mosaic of human connection. Even languages bear these invisible fingerprints. The word orange traveled from Sanskrit to Persian to Arabic before reaching Europe, just like the fruit itself. These weren't random encounters but a slow, deliberate weaving of civilizations. Yet tracing these journeys isn't as simple as following a trail of artifacts. Historians piece together clues like detectives, a pottery shard with foreign glaze here, a borrowed myth about flood heroes there. Take the mysterious sea peoples who roamed the Mediterranean 3,000 years ago. Their origins are still debated, but their impact is undeniable. They sparked a chain reaction that reshaped empires from Egypt to Greece. What's remarkable isn't just their movement, but how host cultures absorbed and transformed their influences. The Etruscans of Italy, for instance, adopted Greek artistic styles but infused them with their own bold spirit, creating something entirely new. This fluidity challenges our modern obsession with cultural purity. When archaeologists dig up a Viking burial in Sweden and find a Buddha statue from India, or when DNA analysis reveals that ancient Britons had ancestry from the Middle East, it's proof that isolation was the exception, not the rule. These weren't invasions, but conversations, exchanges that happened over generations, often peacefully, through marriages, apprenticeships, and shared festivals. The next time you sip tea or admire a stained glass window, remember, you're touching the legacy of countless unnamed travelers who carried these ideas across mountains and seas, stitch by stitch, into the tapestry of who we are today. Words are more than just tools for communication, they're time capsules, preserving the footsteps of those who carried them across continents. Think of language as a living archive, where every loanword, every borrowed phrase, is a signature left by ancient travelers. Take the humble word sugar, which began as sharkara in Sanskrit, then transformed into sukkar in Arabic before sweetening European tongues as sucker in French and azúcar in Spanish. This isn't just etymology, it's a paper trail of human movement, revealing how Indian merchants, Arab traders, and Mediterranean sailors passed not just goods but the very words to describe them. But languages don't just borrow, they adapt, creating hybrid dialects that serve as cultural handshakes. In ancient Anatolia, the Hittites absorbed gods and grammar from their neighbors, weaving Hurrian and Mesopotamian elements into their own text. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, the Malay language became a linguistic mosaic, stitching together Sanskrit honorifics, Chinese trade terms, and Arabic religious phrases. These layers aren't accidents, they're evidence of communities living side by side, negotiating not just markets but identities. Even today, the Celtic place names scattered from Galicia in Spain to Galatia in Turkey whisper of migrations so old, their dates are debated, yet their linguistic fingerprints remain. The real detective work begins when languages vanish. Etruscan, spoken in Italy before Rome's rise, left no direct descendants, but its ghost lingers in Latin words like persona, mask, and arena, sand, adopted during centuries of cultural exchange. Similarly, the mysterious linear, a script of Crete, remains undeciphered, yet its symbols echo in later Greek writing, hinting at a transfer of knowledge across civilizations. Linguists pore over these fragments like forensic scientists, tracking phonetic shifts and grammatical quirks to map routes no parchment records. For instance, the subtle differences between Icelandic and Norwegian dialects reveal not just Viking expansion, but the timing of their settlement, like linguistic tree rings marking growth and separation. What makes these discoveries so thrilling is their intimacy. A single word can collapse centuries. When Indonesians use the Portuguese-derived meja for table, or Filipinos greet each other with the Arabic-rooted salamat, they're unwittingly reciting lines from an ancient play of connection. Even grammar tells stories. The Hungarian language's structure, so distinct from its European neighbors, betrays its Uralic origins, a linguistic heirloom carried westward by nomadic ancestors. These aren't dry academic facts. They're proof that every conversation we have today is layered with echoes of those who walked before us, their voices woven into our speech. And here's the twist: sometimes languages preserve what history forgets. The Romani people's dialects, scattered from the Balkans to Brazil, contain Persian and Greek loanwords that trace their journey out of India centuries before written records noted their presence in Europe. Similarly, the Swahili coast's vibrant mix of Bantu and Arabic didn't just facilitate trade. It became a living monument to marriages between African merchants and Persian settlers, their descendants still speaking the blend today. So next time you order coffee from the Arabic kahwa or admire a tulip from the Turkish tulbent, remember, you're not just using words, you're summoning ghosts of ancient crossroads where strangers became neighbors, and their exchanges still shape how we name our world. Pottery shards aren't just broken fragments of the past, they're encrypted messages waiting to be decoded. When archaeologists uncover a piece of Phoenician glass in a Greek settlement or a Chinese silk scrap in an Egyptian tomb, they're holding proof of conversations between civilizations that history books often overlook. Take that stunning Roman glass bowl discovered in a 2,000-year-old Chinese noble's tomb near Nanjing. How did it get there? There's no record of Roman merchants reaching China, yet this delicate artifact suggests a relay of hands, perhaps Persian middlemen passing it along the Silk Road, or Indian sailors transporting it through monsoon winds. Every chip and crack tells a story of human hands exchanging more than just objects. Coins are even more revealing. A single silver drachm minted in Athens might turn up in the ruins of an ancient Afghan city, its worn edges speaking of countless transactions. But here's what's fascinating. Archaeologists found Viking-age dirhams, Arabic silver coins, as far north as Sweden, pierced to be worn as jewelry. This wasn't just wealth being traded, it was prestige, a way for Norse traders to showcase their global connections. And sometimes coins rewrite history entirely. For years, scholars debated whether the ancient kingdom of Himyar in Yemen had contact with Rome, until coins surfaced bearing both Latin inscriptions and South Arabian deities, proving a cultural fusion no text had recorded. Then there are the silent witnesses, tools and weapons. A Viking sword unearthed in Turkey, its blade forged from Frankish steel but its hilt adorned with Arabic calligraphy, speaks of a warrior who moved between worlds. Or consider the humble spindle whorl, a tool for spinning thread found in Viking settlements that matches designs from the Baltic to Byzantium. These weren't just utilitarian objects, they were technologies traveling with people, adapting to new environments. Even something as simple as a cooking pot can reveal migrations. Archaeologists analyzing residue in Celtic pots from Britain found traces of spices like coriander, plants that couldn't grow in chilly northern Europe, proving trade routes brought flavors from the Mediterranean sun to Atlantic shores. But how do we know where these artifacts truly came from? That's where science steps in. Isotope analysis lets researchers read the chemical fingerprints in metals or bones, tracing a sword's copper to Cypriot mines or a skeleton's teeth to the Nile Valley based on the water they drank as children. In one astonishing case, isotopes revealed that the Ivory Lady, buried in Bronze Age Spain surrounded by lavish treasures, actually grew up in North Africa, her ivory tusks and amber beads marking her as both outsider and elite. This isn't guesswork, it's chemistry confirming what artifacts hint at, that people, ideas, and goods moved farther and more frequently than we ever imagined. What emerges from these fragments is a world startlingly familiar to ours, a planet knitted together by travelers who carried not just goods but innovations. The same steel-making techniques appear in Viking Norway and samurai Japan because knowledge flowed along trade routes like water. A ceramic style born in Persia shows up in Moorish Spain, then leaps to colonial Mexico, carried by generations of artisans adapting old patterns to new homes. These artifacts collapse time, showing us that globalization isn't a modern invention but an ancient human impulse, one that DNA evidence now confirms in ways even pottery shards couldn't predict. Beneath our skin runs a hidden script written in the language of DNA, a living archive of journeys taken thousands of years ago. Modern genetic studies have peeled back layers of time to reveal astonishing migrations that reshaped continents. Take the Yamnaya people, nomadic herders who rode out of the Eurasian steppes around 5,000 years ago. Their genetic signature appears like a phantom thread, woven into populations from Scandinavia to South Asia. This isn't just a biological curiosity, it's the missing link explaining why languages as different as English and Sanskrit share ancient roots. The Yamnaya didn't just carry genes, they carried words, traditions, and ways of life that echo in half the world's tongues today. Then there's the enigma of Polynesian voyagers, whose seafaring prowess might have reached the Americas long before Columbus. Geneticists examining pre-Columbian skeletons in Chile found traces of Polynesian DNA, a whisper of contact across the vast Pacific. Imagine double-hulled canoes navigating by stars and currents, covering distances so vast that later European sailors feared falling off the Earth's edge. These weren't accidental landings but deliberate expeditions proven by the sweet potato, a crop native to South America that somehow became a staple in Polynesian diets centuries before European contact. Genes and gourds together tell a story textbooks left out, but here's where it gets messy. Sometimes DNA appends what we thought we knew. The sophisticated Minoan civilization of Crete, long assumed to be North African in origin, turned out to share genes with Neolithic Anatolians. Meanwhile, the Guanches of the Canary Islands, described by Spanish colonizers as fair-skinned, revealed through genetic testing to be descended from Berber migrants, their isolation preserving a lineage lost elsewhere. These contradictions aren't flaws in the record but reminders that history is a palimpsest, with each layer overwriting without fully erasing the last. Genetics alone can't capture the full picture, though. A single gene variant might spread through conquest or marriage, through famine or festival. That's why scientists now combine DNA with archaeology, linguistics, and even climate data. In Scandinavia, Viking-era burials show a mix of Sami, Slavic, and Gaelic ancestry, proof that the Norse world was far more diverse than horned helmets suggest. Similarly, the Hazara people of Afghanistan carry Mongol DNA, but their culture blends Persian poetry with Central Asian traditions. Genes map the routes, but it's the artifacts, stories, and recipes that show what people carried in their hearts. This genetic detective work also exposes uncomfortable truths. The Rapa Nui of Easter Island, once thought to have caused their own collapse, actually show no genetic evidence of population decline before European contact. Their story was rewritten by colonial bias. Likewise, the so-called Aryan invasion of India turns out to be a slow mingling of steppe pastoralists and indigenous farmers, their descendants sharing both genes and gods. These findings force us to confront how often history has been weaponized and how DNA can set the record straight. Yet for all its power, a genome can't tell us why the Yamnaya moved west or what songs Polynesian navigators sang. That's where cultural clues take over, the way Bronze Age Britons adopted Iberian metalworking styles but kept their own burial rites, or how Bantu migrants in southern Africa blended their iron smelting skills with Khoisan rock art traditions. Genes give us the skeleton of migration, but culture is the flesh. As we'll see next, when people move, they don't just bring their biology, they bring new ways to build, cook, worship, and dream, remixing the old and new into something extraordinary. Cultural blending wasn't just an accident of history, it was an art form practiced by generations who understood that survival meant adaptation. Picture a sculptor in ancient Gandhara, chiseling the serene face of the Buddha with the precision of Greek marble work, creating statues where Mediterranean curls met the elongated ears of enlightenment. This Greco-Buddhist fusion didn't erase either tradition. It birthed something entirely new, a visual dialogue between Alexander's legacy and the teachings of the Dharma. Over in Rome, soldiers returning from the east brought back the Persian god Mithras, but his rituals transformed in Italian soil initiation ceremonies held in underground temples, where followers shared meals that mirrored both Zoroastrian feasts and Roman Brotherhood cults. These weren't simple borrowings, they were reinventions, proofs that cultures don't collide, they converse. Food tells the same story of quiet revolution. When Norse settlers reached England, they didn't just bring longships, they brought the tradition of brewing hearty winter ales. Over centuries, their Yule celebrations merged with Christian nativity observances, giving us the spiced drinks and evergreen decorations we now associate with Christmas. Even something as simple as the English word egg comes from Old Norse, a linguistic remnant of shared kitchens where Viking and Anglo-Saxon children cracked shells together. But this blending wasn't always voluntary. The Mongol conquests forced the transfer of noodles from China to Persia, yet within generations, Persian cooks had transformed them into delicate saffron-infused strands, a culinary alchemy born of necessity and creativity. Clothing became another canvas for cultural negotiation. In Moorish Spain, silk weavers combined Arabic geometric patterns with Visigothic embroidery techniques, creating textiles so coveted that French nobles lined their cloaks with them. Meanwhile, along the Swahili coast, African cotton met Indian beadwork and Arabian silver thread, producing vibrant Kangas garments that told proverbs in their designs. These fabrics weren't just worn, they were walking manifestos of blended identities. Yet for every story of harmonious fusion, there were tensions simmering beneath the surface. Roman satirists mocked Easternized citizens who preferred Syrian spices to simple Roman bread, while Chinese chroniclers fretted about barbarian musical instruments corrupting courtly rituals. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus dismissed Egyptian customs as backwards, even as Greek architects borrowed pyramid-building techniques for their tombs. Host societies often viewed newcomers with a mix of fascination and fear, admiring their exotic silks but distrusting their unfamiliar gods. Archaeology reveals how these attitudes played out in daily life. In Roman Britain, some villas feature mosaics of Celtic gods alongside Roman deities, suggesting peaceful coexistence. But dig deeper, and you'll find curses scratched onto lead tablets, invoking Roman gods to punish thieving foreign merchants. The truth lies somewhere in between. Ancient people were as capable of xenophobia as they were of curiosity. What's remarkable isn't that clashes happened, it's that despite them, cultural synthesis continued stubbornly and beautifully, like wildflowers pushing through cracks in a stone wall. Perhaps the most telling evidence comes from children's graves. In Constantinople, a 6th century burial revealed a girl buried with a cross around her neck and a Zoroastrian-style amulet beneath her pillow. Her parents, likely migrants from Persia, hadn't chosen one identity over another. They'd equipped their child with protection from both worlds. This tiny grave reminds us that cultural blending wasn't about grand historical forces. It was about parents making impossible choices, artisans experimenting with new styles, and ordinary people finding ways to belong while staying true to the voices of their ancestors. Ancient societies held a mirror to their newcomers, sometimes with warmth, sometimes with suspicion, but always revealing something about themselves. The Egyptians left us vivid accounts of the so-called Sea Peoples, depicting them in temple reliefs as chaotic invaders bringing fire and destruction. Yet scroll forward a few centuries, and those very same invaders appear in records as mercenaries and artisans, their descendants absorbed into the Nile's rhythm. Rome proudly displayed its cosmopolitan identity, boasting temples to Egyptian Isis alongside Celtic Epona, until economic downturns turned foreign into a slur and emperors expelled Greek philosophers while still wearing silk from China. This push and pull wasn't unique to the Mediterranean. China's Tang dynasty welcomed Persian traders to its ports, even allowing them to build Zoroastrian fire temples in Chang'an. But when the Anlushan rebellion shook the empire, suspicion fell on foreign faces, and walls both physical and cultural rose again. What's fascinating is how these societies developed systems to manage diversity. Athens required metics, its resident foreigners, to pay taxes and serve in the military but barred them from owning land, a compromise between inclusion and control. Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers, flipped the script entirely. Rather than assimilating, they built a Mediterranean-spanning trade network that answered to no homeland, proving immigrant communities could rival established powers. Archaeology exposes the quiet rebellions against such divisions. In Ostia, Rome's port city, a tavern wall bears graffiti scrawled in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic, proof that laboring classes mixed freely despite elite prejudices. Meanwhile, along the Silk Road, Xuanzang's travelogues describe Buddhist monasteries where Indian, Chinese, and Central Asian monks debated scriptures without a shared native tongue. These weren't utopias, they were pragmatic spaces where difference became ordinary. The tension often crystallized around religion. When the goddess Cybele's cult spread from Anatolia to Rome, senators initially banned citizens from joining her ecstatic rites, only to later parade her sacred black stone through the streets during crises. Similarly, Viking settlers in Ireland adopted crosses but buried them alongside Thor's hammers, hedging spiritual bets. Resistance and acceptance weren't binary choices but strategies shifting with the winds of necessity. What echoes most strikingly today is how ancient societies weaponized nostalgia. Roman traditionalists mourned the lost virtues of their ancestors while dining on Phoenician-inspired garum sauce. Han Dynasty poets lamented the corruption of foreign fashions even as their own verses borrowed Xiong new horseback rhythms. The pattern repeats, a fear of the new coexisting with reliance on it, a dance as old as migration itself. Now consider the Pomeran Empire, a desert crossroads where Arab, Roman, and Persian cultures fused into something extraordinary. Its queen, Zenobia, claimed descent from Cleopatra while ruling a court that spoke Greek, worshipped Mesopotamian gods, and traded with India. Palmyra wasn't just tolerant, it was alchemical, proving that the most vibrant societies often emerge not from purity, but from the audacity to reimagine identity altogether. The Sogdians didn't just move goods, they moved worlds. Picture a merchant in a bustling Samarkand bazaar, haggling over bolts of Chinese silk while humming a tune that would later become a Tang dynasty court melody. This Iranian-speaking people turned Central Asia into a cultural switchboard, their caravans carrying not only spices and silver but entire belief systems. When Buddhism traveled from India to China, it was often Sogdian translators who bridged the linguistic gap, their manuscripts revealing Sanskrit terms carefully rendered into Chinese through Sogdian intermediaries. Their influence extended to the very fabric of daily life. Even the word paradise entered European languages through their Old Persian, paradisa, carried westward along trade routes. What set the Sogdians apart was their mastery of diaspora living. Excavations in China's Turpan Basin uncovered a 7th century contract where a Sogdian woman leased land to a Chinese farmer, signed in both languages with unmistakable legal precision. Their letters, preserved in the dry air of the go-by, crackle with intimate urgency, a mother scolding her son for not writing, a trader warning his partner about bandits. These weren't just business documents, but proof of communities thriving thousands of miles from home, maintaining ties through carefully maintained relay stations where riders could swap exhausted horses for fresh mounts. Their religious footprint was equally vast. In Dunhuang's caves, Sogdian Zoroastrian fire altars stand just corridors away from Buddhist frescoes they helped finance. A Sogdian tomb in Xi'an blends Persian mythical beasts with Chinese cloud motifs, while their script adapted from Aramaic later inspired the Uyghur and Mongol writing systems. Even their funerary practices reveal cultural alchemy. Excavated ossuaries hold bones wrapped in silk inscribed with Chinese characters but decorated with Zoroastrian divinities. Yet by the 10th century, their star faded, not through conquest but obsolescence, as maritime routes replaced overland caravans and new empires rewrote trade rules. The last Sogdian language documents from Mount Mug showed desperate petitions to weakening rulers. Their once vibrant merchant quarters gradually absorbed into Turkic and Persian cities. Their legacy, though, pulses in unexpected places. The lute-like pipa central to Chinese classical music traces to Sogdian instruments, while their agricultural techniques transformed Central Asian oases. Their disappearance poses a haunting question: how many other cultures shaped our world before vanishing into history's footnotes? As we turn from the dust of the Silk Road to the spray of the Mediterranean, we'll encounter another people who mastered the art of cultural bridge building, not on camelback but aboard sleek-hulled ships. The Phoenicians didn't just sail between ports, they wove the first threads of a connected ancient world. The Phoenicians didn't just trade goods, they traded the very building blocks of civilization. Imagine a world where writing was a privilege locked behind the complex hieroglyphs of Egypt or the cuneiform wedges of Mesopotamia. Then came these seafaring innovators from the cedar-lined coasts of Lebanon, who distilled writing into 22 simple symbols representing consonant sounds. This wasn't just an alphabet, it was a revolution in a clay pot, a tool so adaptable that Greek sailors would later add vowels to it, birthing the script that would give us Homer's epics and eventually the letters on your screen. The Phoenicians' genius lay in understanding that communication wasn't for temples alone. It belonged on cargo manifests and shopkeepers' notes, in the hands of anyone who needed to record a debt or send a message home. Their other legendary invention, Tyrian purple, tells a darker story. Harvesting this vibrant dye required crushing thousands of Mediterranean sea snails. A single gram of pigment took 12,000 mollusks. The stench of rotting shellfish from coastal dye vats was so notorious that Roman authors placed Phoenician workshops downwind of cities. Yet the color's rarity made it worth the cost, becoming synonymous with power from Babylon to Rome. When a Phoenician merchant unrolled a bolt of purple fabric in a foreign port, they weren't just selling cloth, they were selling prestige, a tangible connection to a network stretching from the Atlantic to the Indus Valley. What's often overlooked is how these two innovations intertwined. The alphabet traveled on ships carrying purple-dyed wool, scratched into wax tablets by traders tracking transactions. At Carthage, their greatest colony, archaeologists have found children's practice tablets with alphabets next to dyeing tools, proof that commerce and literacy grew hand in hand. Unlike empires that imposed culture by sword, the Phoenicians let utility do the work. A Greek potter might adopt their letters to label wares, while an Iberian chieftain's wife coveted their purple robes, little realizing she was participating in a quiet cultural takeover. Yet for all their influence, the Phoenicians faced erasure. Rome's annihilation of Carthage in 146 BC wasn't just a military victory, it was a systematic destruction of memory. The Senate ordered fields sown with salt, libraries burned, and survivors enslaved. Later Roman historians painted the Phoenicians as cunning tricksters, obscuring their role as Mediterranean connectors. Even their name is a Greek label, phoenix, meaning purple people, while they called themselves Canaanites. Only fragments survive, a shipwreck off Malta carrying Egyptian and Etruscan goods in Phoenician hulls, or a sacrificial altar in Sardinia bearing inscriptions to their god Baal alongside local deities. The real tragedy isn't just what was lost, but how close we came to losing more. Were it not for the stubborn survival of their alphabet in Greek hands, or the purple-stained shells littering forgotten beaches, we might never have known these masters of cultural osmosis. Their story whispers a warning how many other societies shaped our world before being reduced to footnotes. As we turn from the Mediterranean sunlit waters to the vast Pacific, another mystery awaits. The Polynesians, whose celestial navigation connected islands separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, leaving trails not in clay tablets but in shared stars and stories. Polynesian navigators didn't just cross oceans, they danced with them, reading the night sky and the language of waves like pages in a celestial atlas. Picture this, a double-hulled canoe cutting through the Pacific's vast expanse, its crew steering not by compass or chart, but by memorizing the rise of stars, the flight paths of birds, even the way swells bent around unseen islands hundreds of miles away. These weren't accidental voyages, they were deliberate acts of wayfinding, a science so precise that modern sailors using traditional methods have successfully replicated routes from Tahiti to New Zealand using only ancestral knowledge. The sweet potato tells a story even more astonishing. This humble tuber, native to South America, somehow became a staple crop across Polynesia centuries before Europeans arrived. For years, scholars argued it must have floated across the Pacific on its own until genetics revealed the truth. Polynesian varieties shared DNA with pre-Columbian South American cultivars, proving someone carried them westward. But how? The answer lies in oral traditions like the Maori tale of Huey T. Rangura, who spoke of encountering frozen seas and land where the sun hides, possibly Antarctica or the icy southern tip of Chile. These weren't myths but encrypted travel logs, preserving routes too dangerous to forget. Western science long dismissed these feats as impossible, clinging to the myth that Polynesians merely drifted aimlessly until stumbling upon islands. Then came the Hokula, a reconstructed voyaging canoe that in 1976 sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional navigation. Its success shattered colonial assumptions, proving what Polynesian elders had always known. Their ancestors mapped the Pacific with nothing but observation, memory, and an intimate dialogue with nature. Even the names of stars Hokupa North Star and Ki'alai Kahiki, the path to Tahiti, served as waypoints in a mental GPS refined over generations. Yet these voyages weren't just about exploration, they were acts of ecological engineering. Canoes carried not just people but entire ecosystems, taro shoots, breadfruit saplings, pigs, and chickens, transforming barren volcanic islands into habitable homes. In New Zealand, Polynesian settlers became the Maori, adapting tropical farming techniques to temperate climates by engineering elaborate pit storage systems for kumara sweet potatoes. Their migrations created a living library of biodiversity, with coconut palms in the Cook Islands and paper mulberry trees in Hawaii, all tracing back to deliberate transplantation. The tragedy lies in what was nearly lost. Missionaries and colonial administrators suppressed wayfinding knowledge, dismissing it as primitive superstition. By the 20th century, only a handful of elders in Micronesia's Caroline Islands still practiced traditional navigation. Then came Maupiailug, a master navigator from Satawal who broke taboos against sharing sacred knowledge to teach a new generation. His mentorship reignited a cultural renaissance, one that now sees schools in Hawaii teaching star compasses alongside algebra, and young navigators using smartphones to document wave patterns their ancestors memorized. This revival forces us to reconsider what discovery really means. When Captain Cook found Hawaii in 1778, he marveled at how islanders spoke a language related to Tahitian Ano, where he was witnessing the tail end of a migration saga that had spanned millennia. The Polynesians didn't need European maps to connect their world. They'd already built a network of routes etched in chants and stick charts, where shells represented islands and curved palm ribs mapped ocean swells. Their story isn't just about the past, it's a beacon for reclaiming indigenous knowledge in an age of climate crisis, where ancient understandings of currents and weather patterns might hold keys to our collective survival. But not all journeys across the waves were chosen. As we turn from the Polynesian celestial odysseys, we confront a far grimmer chapter, the forced migrations of slavery, where human beings became cargo, and cultural connections were severed by chains rather than forged by shared stars. The contrast couldn't be starker. One people navigating oceans with reverence, another trafficked across them in brutality. Yet both reshape our understanding of how movement, whether voluntary or coerced, irrevocably alters the tapestry of human history. Assyrian conquerors didn't just take land, they rewrote maps with human lives. When they uprooted entire communities from Babylon to the Levant, mixing conquered peoples like ingredients in a brutal recipe, they weren't merely punishing rebellion, they were engineering cultural erasure. Imagine being marched across mountains with nothing but the songs your grandmother taught you, only to find yourself replanted in a foreign valley where your children would forget the old gods but still dream in your mother tongue. These forced relocations didn't just scatter people, they created pockets of resistance, like the Israelites deported to Nineveh, who secretly preserved scrolls that would later become the Hebrew Bible. The Babylonian exile takes this trauma to sacred dimensions. When Nebuchadnezzar's forces dragged Judean elites to Mesopotamia in 586 BCE, they didn't anticipate those prisoners would transform captivity into a crucible of faith. Far from their temple, the exiled Jews did something extraordinary. They replaced physical sacrifice with scripture study, birthing synagogues as portable houses of worship. The Psalms composed during this period ache with longing for Zion, yet they also reveal adaptations, like adopting Babylonian lunar calendar terms while fiercely maintaining Sabbath observance. This wasn't just survival, it was spiritual innovation forged in displacement. Rome perfected forced migration as an imperial tool. After crushing rebellions in Judea or Britain, enslaved survivors might find themselves rowing galleys off Sicily, mining Spanish silver, or tutoring patrician children in Greek philosophy. The graffiti under Vesuvius preserves their voices, a Celtic slave's prayer to Epona scratched onto a Pompeian wall, a Syrian dancer's name etched backstage at a theater. These fragments remind us that even in bondage, people carried cultures forward. The famous Zeno archive shows how a Phoenician family enslaved in Athens rose to become wealthy spice merchants, their contracts still bearing traces of their ancestral language. The African diaspora's cultural resilience shines most vividly in Haiti, when enslaved Fawn and Congo peoples were brutalized on French plantations. They disguised their Vodou deities as Catholic saints. The warrior spirit Ogu became Saint James, while the maternal Ezeli was recast as the Virgin Mary. Drum rhythms forbidden by day pulsed through night ceremonies, preserving West African musical scales that would later birth jazz. Enslaved cooks smuggled okra seeds in their hair, transforming New World cuisine with ancestral flavors. Their ingenuity reveals a painful truth. Oppression couldn't sever memory, only force it underground to resurface in coded forms. religion became both anchor and sail for these uprooted communities. Persian Jews exiled to India built synagogues with Kerala's pepper merchants, blending Hebrew liturgy with Malayalam loanwords. Mandaean Gnostics fleeing Roman persecution carried their baptism rituals down the Euphrates to Iraqi marshes, where their silver-clad scriptures still mirror ancient Jordan River practices. Even the Roma people, displaced across Europe for centuries, sustained Hindu-derived purity customs alongside adopted Christian saints. What emerges isn't a story of passive suffering but of sacred syncretism, faith traditions mutating like viruses to survive new hosts. These forced journeys left scars still visible in DNA and liturgy alike. Genetic studies reveal Sicilians with North African ancestry from the Arab slave trade, while the nasal chanting of Greek Orthodox choirs in Istanbul echoes melodies banned when Byzantine Christians became Ottoman subjects. The paradox is haunting violence designed to break cultural continuity instead created new hybrids, like the way Armenian refugees in Jerusalem baked their flatbreads on Coptic ovens while keeping their alphabet alive in exile. When we trace these threads, we're not just studying history, we're witnessing the indestructibility of human identity, reshaped but never erased by the cruelest of journeys. Religious diasporas prove that faith doesn't merely survive journeys, it transforms them. Take the Buddhist monk Bodhidharma, who trekked from India to China in the 5th century, carrying not just scriptures but a radical new practice, meditation. By the time his teachings reached Japan as Zen Buddhism centuries later, they'd absorbed Chinese Taoist concepts and evolved into austere rock garden spiritual landscapes where raked gravel symbolized flowing water, adapting to an island nation's reverence for nature. Meanwhile, along the same Silk Road routes, Zoroastrians fleeing Islamic conquests in Persia carried embers from their sacred fires to Gujarat, where they became the Parsi community. Their temples still face the sun, just as in ancient Persia, but the rituals now incorporate Gujarati phrases, proof that preservation and adaptation aren't opposites, but partners in survival. Early Christian refugees performed similar alchemy. When Armenian converts escaped Roman persecution, they didn't just build churches, they encoded their identity into the land itself, carving crosses into volcanic rock so the terrain itself testified to their faith. Over in Ethiopia, the Ark of the Covenant's legend merged with local traditions, creating a sacred symbiosis where Coptic Christian liturgy still echoes with the cadence of jazz, a language otherwise lost to time. These weren't diluted versions of the original faiths, they were living dialogues between belief and belonging. Sacred objects became vessels of cultural memory. Tibetan Buddhists fleeing Chinese invasion in the 1950s carried sand mandalas into exile, painstakingly recreating these intricate artworks in Indian monasteries, each grain a whispered prayer for return. Jewish refugees from Iberia sewed Torah scrolls into their clothing during the Inquisition, their silver pointers doubling as hidden compass needles pointing toward safe harbors. Even the humblest items held power. A Coptic family's clay lamp depicting Saint Mina's might light both their Cairo home and, generations later, their Sydney apartment, the flickering flame connecting two worlds. Yet this spiritual mobility wasn't without tension. When Nestorian Christians carried their faith along the Silk Road, their Syriac language steles in China baffled Tang dynasty officials, who initially welcomed them as exotic curiosities before political winds shifted. The Manichaeans faced even harsher fates, once thriving from North Africa to Fujian. Their illuminated books were burned as heresy by Romans, Zoroastrians, and Confucians alike, leaving only fragments hidden in desert caves. Oppression often forced innovation. The crypto-Jews of Portugal baked matzo in secret, calling it pau azimo to avoid suspicion, while their prayers borrowed Catholic cadences to mask Hebrew beneath Latin rhythms. What emerges from these stories isn't just resilience but reinvention. The Sufi mystics who wandered from Morocco to Malaysia didn't just spread Islam. They wove it into local fabrics, turning Bengali river festivals into celebrations of saints and transforming Anatolian whirling dances into acts of devotion. Their shrines became way stations not just for pilgrims but for ideas, where Persian poetry met Javanese shadow puppetry under the same dome. This cultural cross-pollination reminds us that the most enduring faiths aren't monoliths but mosaics, shaped by countless hands across countless borders. Now consider how these spiritual journeys intertwine with something even more universal, the meals we share. Just as a Parsi family in Mumbai still cooks Persian saffron rice with Indian spices, or a Japanese monk's vegetarian shoujin ryori bears traces of Tang Dynasty China, every bite tells a story of migration. From the chickpeas that crossed the Mediterranean in Roman ships to the chili peppers that revolutionized Sichuan cuisine after their Atlantic voyage, food carries memories even when languages fade, a delicious testament to how movement reshapes not just what we believe, but what we savor. Every spoonful of spaghetti tells an odyssey, one that begins not in Italy, but in the bustling souks of medieval Arab Sicily. When Muslim traders introduced dried noodles called itriya to the island in the 9th century, they couldn't have imagined this humble staple would evolve into pasta, a global obsession. Yet the journey from Sicilian docks to Roman dinner plates wasn't instant. It took Jewish merchants in Naples perfecting durum wheat dough and Marco Polo's likely exaggerated tales of Chinese noodles to cement Italy's love affair with this versatile food. The real twist: early Italian pasta was sweet, dusted with sugar and cinnamon, until New World tomatoes arrived via Spanish galleons, completing a culinary circle that spanned 3 continents. Spices charted even more astonishing routes. That black pepper sprinkled on your salad. Archaeologists found it nestled in the nostrils of Ramses II's mummy, a fragrant offering from traders who braved monsoons to connect India and Egypt. Centuries later, Venetian merchants became fabulously wealthy selling the same peppercorns to Europeans, until Portuguese navigators smashed their monopoly by sailing straight to the source. But no spice reshaped palates quite like the humble chili pepper. Native to Bolivia, it traveled with Columbus to Spain, leapt to Portuguese colonies in Africa and Asia, and ignited a fiery revolution. Thai curries, Sichuan mapo tofu, even Hungarian paprika, all owe their heat to this accidental globe-trotter. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was sacred memory. When Sephardic Jews fled the Spanish Inquisition, they carried a dafhina, a slow-cooked Sabbath stew, to new homes from Amsterdam to Istanbul. Each version adapted local ingredients. Moroccan Jews added chickpeas, Tunisians included fiery harissa, yet all preserved the ritual of sealing pots before sundown. Similarly, the Roma people's portable ovens let them bake traditional bread wherever persecution scattered them, their dough echoing ancestral recipes from Rajasthan to Romania. Even something as simple as a bagel encodes a migration story. Polish Jews perfected its chewy texture using Ashkenazi techniques, only for New York immigrants to transform it into an American breakfast icon. Archaeobotanists now decode these edible histories grain by grain. Charred wheat seeds in Bronze Age British pits reveal Mediterranean imports, while residue on Mesopotamian pottery proves they drank Indian cinnamon-infused beer. In Turkey, scientists analyzing dental plaque on 9,000-year-old teeth found evidence of fermented milk, early yogurt consumed by some of history's first dairy migrants. These microscopic clues reveal a truth we often forget. Every meal is a living museum, preserving flavors first blended by long-vanished cooks. but the most profound culinary fusions emerged from necessity. Enslaved Africans in the American South melded okra and rice from their homelands with Native American corn and European offcuts, creating soul food's rich tapestry. In Malaysia, Chinese laborers stir-fried local lemongrass with imported soy sauce, birthing Nyonya cuisine. Even the humble potato, once shunned as devil's apples in Europe, became Ireland's lifeline after Columbian exchanges, then circled back to its Andean homeland as French fries. These dishes didn't just cross borders, they dissolved them, proving that flavor is the most persuasive diplomat. Now, consider the tools that made these exchanges possible. That pestle grinding your spices, its design migrated from Southeast Asian stone mortars to Aztec molcajits. The wok sizzling your stir-fry, its concave shape evolved from Persian metalworking techniques meeting Chinese iron casting skills. Behind every immigrant's recipe book lay hidden technologies, often overlooked innovations that silently shaped our kitchens. Which brings us to the untold story of how displaced minds transformed more than just menus, but the very fabric of material progress. Paper didn't just carry words, it carried civilizations. When Chinese artisans perfected the art of pulping mulberry bark in the 2nd century, they couldn't have imagined their invention would one day preserve the works of Aristotle or the poetry of Rumi. But after the Battle of Tollas in 751, Arab craftsmen captured Chinese papermakers and brought their secrets to Samarkand. Within decades, Baghdad's House of Wisdom buzzed with scribes copying Greek philosophy onto smooth sheets, a stark contrast to Europe's scarce and moldering parchment. This wasn't just a change of material, it was an intellectual explosion, enabling libraries to flourish and ideas to travel lighter and faster than ever before. Yet paper's journey pales next to gunpowder's transformative path. Originally a Taoist alchemist's failed elixir in 9th century China, it became the Mongols' terrifying weapon as they swept westward. But here's the twist. Islamic chemists in Damascus refined the formula, creating granular powder that burned more predictably, while European engineers, learning from translated Arabic texts, turned it into cannons that shattered castle walls. The same substance that launched festive fireworks in Song Dynasty China also propelled Ottoman armies to Vienna's gates, proving technology has no loyalties. Then there's the compass, a humble lodestone floating in water that rewrote the rules of navigation. Chinese sailors used it to traverse the Indian Ocean, Arab traders adapted it for desert caravans, and Venetian navigators, thanks to Marco Polo's accounts, employed it to chart Mediterranean trade routes. But the real marvel lies in how these tools didn't just move, they evolved. The Chinese south-pointing spoon became the Islamic Qibla indicator, helping Muslims orient toward Mecca, then morphed into the pivoted needle that guided Columbus across the Atlantic. Each culture didn't just adopt the compass, they reimagined it for their own needs. Few inventions reshaped daily life as profoundly as the printing press, yet its story is one of delayed diffusion. While Chinese monks were mass-producing Buddhist texts with wooden blocks as early as the 8th century, movable metal type stagnated in Korea for centuries. Why? Because the Chinese writing system's thousands of characters made the technology impractical, while Gutenberg's Latin alphabet with its mere 26 letters turned printing into a revolution. The twist: some historians argue Gutenberg may have drawn inspiration from Silk Road travelers' descriptions of Asian techniques, proving even stalled innovations eventually find their moment. Warfare felt these cross-cultural currents too. The humble stirrup, born among nomadic horsemen of the Central Asian steppes, reached Europe via Avars and Byzantines, and suddenly knights could wield lances with devastating force. This small leather loop tilted the balance of power, enabling feudal systems built around armored cavalry. Meanwhile, Damascus steel forged from Indian Wootz ingots by Syrian smiths became legendary for its sharpness and flexibility. Crusaders marveled at blades that could slice through floating silk scarves, unaware their secret lay in trace vanadium from Sri Lankan mines. When the original ore sources vanished, the technique was lost for centuries, a reminder that some technologies are as fragile as the trade routes that sustain them. The guardians of these secrets were often migrant artisans themselves. Persian glassmakers in Venice perfected cristallo, a flawless glass mimicking rock crystal, while Armenian merchants controlled the cobalt trade that colored Chinese porcelain, Ming blue. These experts walked a tightrope hoarding knowledge to maintain their value while inevitably leaking techniques through apprentices and marriages. A single escaped papermaker from Samarkand could seed an entire industry in Cairo, just as a kidnapped silk weaver from Byzantium might spark Persia's textile boom. The irony, the very walls meant to protect trade secrets became the cracks through which innovation seeped. Behind every eureka moment in history, there's usually an unsung traveler who carried the spark. Fibonacci's Liber Abaci introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals to Europe after he studied with North African mathematicians, while the astrolabe's journey from Greek antiquity to Islamic Spain enabled sailors to navigate by stars. Even mundane items like the spinning wheel migrated from India to Europe via the Islamic world, revolutionizing textile production. These weren't just transfers of objects, they were transmissions of possibility, each one rippling across societies like stones tossed into a pond. Now consider whose hands guided these transformations. While histories often spotlight kings and conquerors, the real architects of technological exchange were frequently women, like the Sicilian silk weavers who preserved Byzantine techniques under Arab rule, or the Mughal princesses who patronized Persian miniaturists blending styles from across their empire. Their stories, long overshadowed, reveal how culture moves not just through battles and trade deals, but through the quiet, determined labor of those who weave, paint, calculate, and invent. From the workshops of Damascus to the scriptoria of medieval convents, women didn't just witness these exchanges, they drove them. Women moved through history not just as shadows trailing behind male travelers, but as invisible architects of cultural transmission. Take the Armenian brides who crossed into Persia with their trousseaux. Those carefully packed dowries weren't just personal treasures, but vessels of technique. Hidden between folded linens were wooden distaffs and spindle whorls, tools that carried the secrets of their homeland's intricate weaving patterns. Within a generation, Persian textiles began featuring Armenian knotwork, a silent testament to the skill these women transplanted into foreign soil. Over in Norse Greenland, where sagas glorify male explorers, grave excavations tell a different story. The well-preserved burial of a woman named Gudrid reveals a startling inventory: a walrus ivory weaving sword, a whalebone spindle, and a cloak woven in a distinct Icelandic style, proof that settler women like her weren't just preserving traditions, but actively reproducing them in a land where European materials were scarce. The resilience of enslaved women's cultural memory is even more striking. In the Caribbean, plantation records reduce them to inventory numbers, but their descendants' oral histories preserve something far richer. Akan women sold into slavery carried the tradition of Adinkra symbols, visual proverbs once printed on royal Ghanaian cloth. Stripped of materials, they recreated these symbols in basket weaving patterns and body scarification, turning their very skin into living archives. Similarly, in the American South, enslaved healers like Biddy Mason smuggled medicinal knowledge across borders, using West African herbal remedies to treat both slave quarters and, later, white households that would never acknowledge their debt to her expertise. Archaeology is slowly correcting the record. In a 7th century Saxon burial in England, researchers found a woman buried with a silver brooch of Byzantine design, not looted, but worn smooth from years of use. Chemical analysis of her teeth revealed she grew up near the Black Sea, suggesting she married into a Saxon community and brought her craftsmanship with her. Even folk songs hold clues. The haunting Lithuanian Sutartines polyphonic songs, performed exclusively by women, contain melodic structures found nowhere else in Europe, but eerily similar to Siberian indigenous music. These aren't coincidences, but echoes of female migrations erased from official chronicles. The challenge in reconstructing their lives lies in the biases of historical sources. Male scribes documented wars and treaties, not the quiet work of women teaching children embroidery stitches or lullabies in forgotten dialects. Yet occasionally, a rare voice breaks through. The Viking Age runestone at Hasmira in Sweden commemorates not a warrior, but a woman named Odindisa, praised for her skill in running the household, a phrase scholars now interpret as managing trade, given the foreign coins found near her estate. Similarly, a Babylonian tablet lists a business partnership between a male merchant and his wife, the latter described as handling transactions in the tongue of the Hittites, revealing her as the true linguistic bridge between cultures. What emerges is a pattern of uncredited influence, the intricate filigree on Spanish colonial jewelry, likely influenced by Morisco women who blended Arabic metalworking techniques with Catholic motifs before their expulsion. The distinctive floral patterns on Ukrainian Easter eggs, possibly traceable to Mongol women who settled in the region after the empire's collapse, their designs persisting long after their names vanished. These women didn't just adapt to new homes, they reshaped them, stitching fragments of their heritage into the fabric of places that would eventually claim those traditions as their own. Now consider the enigmatic script scratched onto a broken pottery shard in ancient Crete, Linear a writing system undeciphered for millennia. Recent studies suggest it may encode not just administrative lists, but the voices of Minoan women who managed temple economies. The symbols share curious similarities with Luwian hieroglyphs from Anatolia, hinting at a network of female scribes whose influence stretched across the Aegean. Could cracking this code finally reveal the missing narratives of history's silent carriers? The answer may lie not in grand royal decrees, but in the humble inventories of priestesses and the merchant wives who kept civilization's ledgers. The wooden tablets of Rapa Nui whisper in a language no living person understands, carved with intricate glyphs resembling human figures, birds, and plants. The Rongorongo script remains one of archaeology's most stubborn puzzles. Some signs mirror petroglyphs found in Tahiti and the Marquesas, twisted frigate birds and crescent waves that suggest a shared visual language across Polynesia. But here's the twist. A few symbols bear uncanny resemblance to motifs from South America's Chavin culture, where similar spirals and stylized eyes adorned temples centuries before Polynesians reached Easter Island. Could these tablets hold evidence of trans-Pacific contact, or are they purely a local innovation born in isolation? Linguists have tried every tool to crack Rongorongo, comparing it to Hawaiian copper cloth patterns, analyzing its possible lunar calendar functions, even feeding the glyphs into AI algorithms. Yet the script defies classification. Unlike the linear bead tablets of ancient Crete, which were deciphered by linking symbols to early Greek, Rongorongo has no Rosetta Stone. The last traditional practitioners died in the 19th century, taking their knowledge of the chanting rhythm said to accompany the tablet's reading. What remains are tantalizing clues, glyphs that alternate direction in a system called reverse Boustrophedon, a writing method seen in ancient Anatolia and Greece of all places. The debate splits scholars. Some argue the script was invented after Spanish visitors showed Rapa Nui chiefs written documents in the 18th century, a desperate bid to create cultural parity with European talking paper. Others point to oral traditions describing pre-contact priests reading the tablets during sacred ceremonies. The truth may lie in between, a hybrid system blending indigenous signs with outsider influences. Much like the island's famous moai statues fused Polynesian carving traditions with local volcanic stone. What's undeniable is how climate catastrophe shaped this story. As deforestation and soil depletion ravaged Rapa Nui, survival likely eclipsed script preservation. The same environmental pressures that spurred Polynesian migrations across the Pacific shrinking resources. Shifting winds may have turned Rongorongo from a living tradition into a relic. Similar patterns emerge globally. The Greenland Norse abandoned runic writing as the Little Ice Age froze their farms, while Maya scribes stopped recording dates on stelae as drought collapsed their cities. When survival hangs in the balance, cultural knowledge often becomes collateral damage. Now, consider the bigger picture. From the Sahara's drying grasslands pushing early herders into the Nile Valley, to the volcanic winters that drove Anatolian farmers into Europe, climate has always been the silent orchestrator of human movement. The Akkadian Empire crumbled under 4 centuries of drought, scattering its speakers across Mesopotamia and seeding new dialects. Even the fabled Bantu expansion across Africa may have been less about conquest and more about following rainfall patterns that opened ecological niches. These weren't random wanderings, they were calculated responses to a changing planet, with each migration rewriting the cultural map. Ice cores and pollen samples now let us trace these journeys with startling precision. When scientists drilled into Andean glaciers, they found dust layers from the Sahara dating to the very era when Berber traders first crossed the desert with camel caravans. Similarly, sediment cores from the Baltic reveal periods of sudden oak decline evidence of cold snaps that likely triggered Germanic tribes' southward movements toward Rome. The Earth itself keeps archives of these climate-driven odysseys if we know how to read them. But here's what's haunting: the choices forced upon migrants when their world changes. The ancestral Pueblones didn't abandon Chaco Canyon's towers on a whim. Tree rings showed decades of failing rains. The Moch people of Peru watched their irrigation canals run dry as El Niño floods drowned their fields, leaving vivid pottery depictions of fishermen fleeing swollen rivers. These artistic fragments are more than art, they're climate diaries, proof that environmental stress has always been a catalyst for reinvention. Today, as rising seas swallow islands and droughts ignite wildfires, we're witnessing the latest chapter in this ancient story. The difference, unlike the Polynesians who navigated by stars or the Berbers who memorized desert wells, we have satellites and climate models tools that could let us write a different ending. The lesson from Rongorongo's silent tablets and abandoned villages isn't just about loss but resilience, the enduring human knack for adaptation, even when the winds change course. The ruins of Ugarit tell a silent story of desperation and resilience. When drought parched the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, this thriving Bronze Age port became a ghost town, its clay tablets left mid-sentence, its granaries emptied by fleeing citizens. Archaeologists found one chilling message from its last king, pleading for grain shipments that never came. "My fields are like a widow's robe, barren and blown by the wind." The so-called sea peoples who sacked cities from Troy to Gaza weren't mindless invaders. They were climate refugees armed with oars and hunger, driven from collapsing homelands by failing harvests and shifting winds. Tree rings from Anatolia confirm their nightmare, 3 centuries of progressively drier seasons that turned bread baskets to dust. half a world away, similar forces stirred the steppes. Pollen samples from Mongolia's lakes reveal a grim transformation, lush grasslands retreating as deserts expanded around 300 CE, pushing the Huns' ancestors westward in search of pasture. Their migration wasn't conquest for glory but survival, a domino effect that would eventually topple Rome's frontiers. Ice cores from Greenland tell an even colder tale. When temperatures dropped during the Little Ice Age, Norse settlers found their European farming techniques useless against encroaching glaciers. Their last written record, a wedding notice from 1400, scratched onto a piece of driftwood as frost claimed their fields. What binds these stories is paleoclimatology's uncanny detective work. By drilling into glacier ice, scientists count dust layers like tree rings, each band revealing which year's drought choked the skies. In Turkey, they've matched lead pollution spikes in ice with silver mining booms mentioned in Hittite tablets. Meanwhile, oxygen isotopes in ancient snail shells from Mexico track rainfall patterns that drove Mayan farmers northward. These aren't abstract data points. They're the environmental fingerprints on humanity's oldest cold cases. Nowhere are these lessons more vivid than in Petra, the rose-red city carved by Nabatean nomads. When Arabian droughts depleted their traditional grazing lands around 400 BCE, they didn't collapse, they innovated. These desert immigrants mastered flash flood harvesting, channeling scarce rainwater through intricate terracotta pipes to cultivate hanging gardens in cliff faces. Their secret, adapting techniques from Assyrian refugees who joined their caravans generations earlier. Petra's tombs bear inscriptions in Aramaic, Greek, and Arabic, a linguistic mosaic proving that cultural exchange wasn't just survival strategy but the foundation of greatness. The parallels to today's climate crises are impossible to ignore. Like the Minoans who rebuilt after volcanic winters or the Khmer Empire's engineers who redesigned Anka's reservoirs during monsoon shifts, our ancestors teach us that displacement isn't defeat, it's often the catalyst for extraordinary reinvention. As Greenland's ice melts to reveal abandoned Viking barns and Syrian farmers replant crops in German soil, we're witnessing the latest chapter in humanity's oldest story, the endless dance between a changing Earth and the adaptable minds it shapes. Alexandria's lighthouse didn't just guide ships, it illuminated a bold experiment in human coexistence. When Alexander staked out the city's grid with barley meal, legend says birds swooped down to eat it, an omen his soothsayers interpreted as the city would nourish many. They weren't wrong. Within decades, this stretch of Egyptian coast became a dizzying crossroads where Greek mathematicians debated under colonnades funded by pharaohs. Jewish scholars passed Torah scrolls in Aramaic accented Greek, and Egyptian priests preserved hieroglyphic wisdom alongside Aristotle's latest treatises. The real marvel wasn't the towering library, though its 500,000 scrolls were unmatched, but the invisible threads connecting minds across languages and traditions. Take the Septuagint project, where 72 rabbis allegedly worked in separate cells to translate Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The story goes that all 72 versions matched perfectly, a divine endorsement of cultural exchange. Historical records suggest a messier reality. Translators borrowed Egyptian papyrus formats, incorporated Greek philosophical terms like logos, and even adjusted passages to resonate with Hellenistic readers. This wasn't corruption, it was cultural alchemy, proving sacred texts could cross borders without losing their soul. Hypatia, Alexandria's most famous scholar, embodied this synthesis. Daughter of a Greek mathematician, she taught Neoplatonism to Christian and pagan students alike. Her lectures on conic sections punctuated with Persian star charts and Hindu number theories. Her murder by a mob in 415 CE often symbolizes the city's decline. But the deeper tragedy lies in what survived her. Scrolls from her classroom show marginal notes in Coptic, Syriac, and even Brahmi script, proof that her circle included minds from across the known world. The library's cataloging system reveals another quiet revolution. Rather than segregating texts by origin, librarians organized knowledge by subject. Egyptian medical papyri shelved beside Greek anatomy texts, Zoroastrian cosmology alongside Babylonian astronomy. This radical approach assumed truth wasn't owned by any one culture but assembled like a mosaic from countless fragments. When a fire, likely during Caesar's siege, destroyed parts of the collection, it wasn't just words that burned but a model of how difference could fuel discovery rather than conflict. Modern cities chasing diversity metrics might pause at Alexandria's cautionary tale. Its decline began not with invasion but complacency. As Roman grain shipments prioritized Constantinople, the city's elites turned inward, hoarding knowledge as privilege rather than circulating it as currency. The canals silted up, the scholars drifted away, and the last librarian, Theon, spent more time annotating old texts than commissioning new ones. Yet even in its twilight, Alexandria kept surprising. Excavations near the modern harbor unearthed a 1st-century shipwreck carrying Indian black pepper, Chinese silks, and a Roman wine jar inscribed in Tamil, evidence that its trading networks outlasted its intellectual ones. What endures isn't just the legacy of lost scrolls, but the blueprint. Alexandria offered a city where identity wasn't about purity but participation, where the act of translation became a metaphor for coexistence. The gaps in our knowledge about its daily life, how Egyptian farmers viewed Greek philosophers, what Jewish merchants discussed with Nubian traders, remind us that history often preserves structures better than textures. Yet in those silences lies an invitation to imagine a world where the click of abacus beads in a Persian counting house could sync with the scratch of a Greek scribe's pen, both contributing to something neither could achieve alone. Now consider the fragments we'll never recover, the plays of Menander lost in the library's ashes, the treatises of Eratosthenes that calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy. Their absence haunts us, but so does their lesson. Knowledge, like a city, is fragile when hoarded, immortal when shared. As we sift through the layers of Alexandria's legacy, we're left not with answers but with sharper questions about what it truly means to build a home for ideas in a world that often fears them. Lost chronicles haunt historians like ghostly footprints in the sand, their one moment, blurred by time's tides the next. Take the colossal Olmec heads of Mexico, their broad noses and full lips sparking decades of debate. Could these stone giants, carved over 3,000 years ago, hint at African contact? Some point to shared artistic styles with Nubian sculptures, while others note the absence of shipwrecks or deny evidence to bridge the Atlantic gap. The truth may lie in a more subtle story. Perhaps these features reflect indigenous diversity rather than transoceanic voyages, a reminder that human faces hold multitudes without requiring distant origins. Then there's the saga of Hui Shen, the Buddhist monk who allegedly sailed from China to Fusang, a land historians still argue might be California or Mexico. His account, preserved in a 5th-century Chinese text, describes plants resembling agave and pueblos reminiscent of ancestral Puebloan dwellings. But without physical proof, no Chinese pottery in pre-Columbian middens, no linguistic traces in Native American languages, the tale lingers in scholarly limbo. It's a pattern repeating across disciplines. The Kennewick man's contested ancestry, the Bat Creek stone's disputed Cherokee Hebrew inscription, each fragment fueling theories that oscillate between revelation and revision. The real challenge isn't the gaps themselves, but how we fill them. When Polynesian chicken bones surfaced in Chile, they seem to confirm pre-Columbian Pacific contact until later studies suggested possible contamination. Similarly, Viking sagas describing Vinland were long dismissed as legend until Elant's Ox Meadows excavation proved Norse feet had touched Newfoundland. These pendulum swings between skepticism and credulity reveal a deeper tension: history's need for evidence versus humanity's hunger for connection. Responsible scholarship walks a razor's edge, welcoming new possibilities while demanding rigorous proof, lest we replace one oversimplified narrative with another. Modern tools offer fresh hope for these cold cases. LiDAR scans peel back jungle canopies to reveal lost cities, while isotope analysis traces a single-tooth's journey from birth to burial. Yet technology alone can't resolve the biases shaping our questions. Why do some theories, like Roman coins in Okinawa, get dismissed as hoaxes, while others, like Solutrean migration across Ice Age Atlantic ice sheets, ignite controversy? The answer often lies not in the soil but in the politics of who gets to belong where and when. Nowhere is this clearer than in how nationalist movements weaponize or erase ancient mobility. Turkey's emphasis on Central Asian Turkic roots downplays Byzantine layers in Anatolia, while Hindutva narratives sideline the Dravidian and Harappan threads in India's tapestry. Even America's melting pot ideal stumbles when faced with evidence of pre-Columbian transoceanic contacts, as if acknowledging earlier globalism might dilute the myth of virgin wilderness. These aren't academic quibbles, they're battles over identity with real consequences for who claims heritage and territory. Today, perhaps the most profound lesson from these gaps is humility. For every Rosetta Stone that cracks a code, there's a linear, a still-defying translation. The Rongorongo tablets of Easter Island, the Olmec's undeciphered glyphs, the Indus Valley script's 400 mysterious characters. They whisper that history isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a conversation spanning millennia, where some voices fade before we learn to hear them. And in that silence lies an invitation to keep questioning, testing, and above all, remembering how much we don't yet know. Now, consider how these debates ripple beyond lecture halls. When schools teach Mayan achievements without mentioning possible Chinese maritime contacts, or when museums label Viking artifacts as European but not global, they're not just presenting facts, they're crafting origin stories that shape who we think we are. The politics of the past aren't confined to dusty archives. They live in border disputes, cultural appropriation lawsuits, and even space race rhetoric about returning to the moon. What gets included or excluded from our collective memory isn't just about accuracy. It's about power and who gets to draw the map of human belonging. History has never been a simple record of what happened. It's a battleground where nations fight to control the narrative of who they are. Walk through Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, and you'll see the layers of this struggle literally painted over one another. Byzantine mosaics of Christ peeking through Ottoman calligraphy, which now share space with modern Turkish flags. This magnificent building stands as a metaphor for how national identities are constructed not by preserving the past, but by selecting which parts to highlight and which to whitewash. Turkey's official history textbooks trace the nation's roots to Central Asian steppe warriors, downplaying the Byzantine Greeks, Armenians, and Arabs who shaped Anatolia for millennia before the Seljuks arrived. It's as if an entire symphony has been reduced to a single repeating note. The same pattern echoes across the subcontinent, where Hindutva ideology promotes the idea of an eternally Hindu India, despite overwhelming evidence of continuous cultural blending. The exquisite Qutub Minar in Delhi tells a different story, its base carved with Sanskrit verses, its upper levels adorned with Arabic calligraphy, a physical manifestation of the synthesis between Hindu artisans and Muslim rulers. Yet today, archaeological surveys prioritize proving the existence of mythical Hindu kingdoms over documenting the complex reality of medieval India's cosmopolitan cities. This isn't just academic dishonesty, it's the erasure of the very diversity that made these civilizations thrive. Jerusalem offers perhaps the most contested ground of all. Beneath its ancient streets, rival archaeological teams dig through layers of history like lawyers building competing cases. Israeli excavations emphasize Jewish connections to the Temple Mount, while Palestinian researchers highlight continuous Arab occupation since the Umayyads. Both narratives are true, yet neither is complete without the other. Just as the city stones bear scars from Roman siege engines, Crusader crosses, and Ottoman crescents. When science becomes a tool for nationalist myth-making, we don't just lose accuracy, we lose the ability to see ourselves in the full complexity of our shared human story. Diaspora communities often fall into a different kind of historical distortion, not erasure, but idealization. The Armenian diaspora's vision of their homeland frequently overlooks the Ottoman-era diversity of cities like Van, where Kurds, Assyrians, and Turks once lived alongside Armenian merchants. Similarly, African-American roots tourism to Ghana sometimes glosses over the complicities of local kingdoms in the slave trade. This isn't to diminish real historical traumas, but to acknowledge that no homeland is exactly as remembered or imagined. Nostalgia smooths out the rough edges of history, turning vibrant, messy civilizations into simplified symbols. The fight over museums reveals these tensions in stark relief. For decades, the British Museum defended its hoard of Parthenon marbles as preservation, claiming Greece couldn't protect its own heritage. Meanwhile, Athens built a state-of-the-art Acropolis museum with empty spaces waiting for their return. This isn't just about ownership, it's about who gets to interpret history. When Benin bronzes sit in Berlin rather than Nigeria, they are presented as exotic curios rather than masterpieces of a living tradition. The very labels on display cases shape perceptions. Is it the Mughal Empire or early modern India, pre-Columbian or indigenous civilizations? Each word carries political weight. A quiet revolution is underway in some institutions. Mexico's National Museum of Anthropology presents the Spanish conquest as one chapter in an ongoing story, rather than a clean break between prehistory and modernity. New Zealand's Te Papa Tongawa gives equal space to Maori and Pakeha narratives, sometimes letting them disagree on adjacent panels. These approaches acknowledge that history isn't a single thread but a tangled weave, where every pull affects the whole pattern. As we'll see next, this reckoning extends beyond museum walls, into classrooms, law courts, and even DNA testing companies as societies grapple with who gets to define their collective past. Museums stand at a crossroads between possession and storytelling. Their glass cases holding more than artifacts, they cradle the unresolved tensions of who owns history. Take the Benin bronzes, those exquisite brass plaques and sculptures looted by British forces in 1897. For decades, they've been displayed in London and Berlin as trophies of empire, while modern-day Benin City struggles to rebuild its royal museum. Yet there's a twist. These works themselves are products of cultural fusion, crafted with Portuguese-supplied metal and depicting European traders alongside Oba kings. They're not just African art but testaments to an early global exchange, their very materials whispering of 16th century trade routes that connected continents. Parthenon marbles tell a similarly layered tale. Lord Elgin's removal of these sculptures from Athens in the early 1800s wasn't just an act of colonial appropriation, it froze them in time. While the remaining fragments in Greece weathered industrial pollution and acid rain, the British Museum's cleaned versions lost centuries of patina, their surfaces scrubbed to a controversial brightness. This physical divergence mirrors the philosophical divide. Should these marbles be reunified in Athens' purpose-built Acropolis Museum, where sunlight mirrors their original orientation, or does their diaspora status in London somehow broaden their cultural resonance? Some institutions are pioneering a third way. The Smithsonian's Journey Stories exhibition doesn't just display immigrant artifacts, it lets them speak. A 19th-century Swedish trunk sits beside a 21st-century Salvadoran backpack, both carrying the same hopes across different centuries. Interactive kiosks invite visitors to record their own migration stories, weaving personal narratives into the historical fabric. Meanwhile, digital projects like the Library of Congress StoryCorps preserve vanishing oral histories, the Punjabi grandmother recalling her first sari stitched from parachute silk after partition, the Syrian chef in Berlin teaching his daughter recipes from Aleppo via WhatsApp. These aren't just archives, they're lifelines connecting past and present diasporas. The real innovation lies in collaborative curation. Amsterdam's Tropenmuseum now shares decision-making with source communities, inviting Indonesian elders to co-interpret colonial-era artifacts. In New Zealand, the Te Papa's Gallipoli exhibit used Maori carvers, Pacifica weavers, and Paca historians to reframe World War I, not as a distant European conflict but as a shared Pacific tragedy. Even the contentious Benin bronzes are finding new contexts. Germany's Humboldt Forum displays them alongside contemporary Nigerian art, creating a dialogue across centuries rather than a static showcase of plunder. Technology is rewriting the rules of repatriation. Virtual reality recreations allow looted artifacts to be returned digitally. The University of London's Museum of Lost Objects projects holograms of destroyed Pomeranian sculptures onto empty pedestals. Meanwhile, 3D printing enables exact replicas. The Instituto Italiano di Tecnologia recently collaborated with Ethiopian priests to recreate the stolen Magdala treasures in resin, bridging the gap while originals remain in British vaults. These solutions don't replace physical restitution, but they democratize access, letting artifacts belong simultaneously to their homelands and the world. The most radical shift might be in who gets to define value. For decades, Western museums prized gold masks and jade statues while ignoring everyday objects, the cooking pots, sewing kits, and children's toys that truly carried immigrant cultures. Now, initiatives like Toronto's Myseum center these humble items, displaying a Vietnamese refugee's tattered dictionary beside a Polish dissident's smuggled typewriter ribbons. By elevating the ordinary, these exhibits remind us that history isn't just made by conquerors and kings, but by the quiet resilience of people who carried their worlds in suitcases and memories. As dusk falls on these debates, one truth emerges: museums won't survive as temples of the past. To stay relevant, they must become living forums where contested histories spark new understandings, where a Benin bronze can provoke discussions about reparations, a Parthenon fragment can symbolize European unity, and a Syrian child's drawing can hang alongside ancient mosaics as equal testaments to human creativity. The choice isn't really between keeping or returning artifacts, but between freezing history in glass cases or letting it breathe, change, and belong to us all. The story of the Roma people begins not on the open road, but in the lush river valleys of northern India over 1,000 years ago. Genetic studies pinpoint their origins among the Domba caste skilled musicians and metalworkers who began an astonishing westward migration around the 11th century. Their journey wasn't marked by conquest or commerce, but by quiet resilience, carrying their language like a living heirloom. Even today, Romani words for basic concepts, pani for water, dand for teeth, echo their Sanskrit roots, linguistic fossils preserving a homeland most Roma have never seen. By the 14th century, their caravans reached the gates of Europe, where scribes recorded their arrival with a mix of fascination and fear. Byzantine chroniclers called them Atsinganoi, believing they were Egyptian mystics. This misunderstanding birthed the enduring label, gypsy, a term now rejected by many Roma as rooted in exoticization. What's often overlooked is how quickly they became cultural alchemists, Hungarian Roma musicians blending Indian raga scales with local folk tunes, Spanish gitano dancers infusing flamenco with the rhythmic footwork of their ancestors. Their art wasn't just preservation, it was reinvention, turning persecution into poetry. The darker chapters of Roma history reveal a pattern all too familiar. From 15th century Wallachia, where Roma were enslaved for 400 years, to Nazi concentration camps where they were marked with black triangles, their suffering has been systemic yet often erased. Even their music, celebrated in concert halls, was weaponized against them. Austrian authorities once banned Romani performers from playing their own compositions, forcing them to mimic Hungarian folk styles for survival. Yet through it all, their oral traditions held fast. A Kalderash folktale about a bird stealing fire from the gods bears striking parallels to both Hindu myths and Promethean legends, suggesting stories traveled the same routes as people. Modern DNA science has become an unexpected ally in validating Roma heritage. Studies show Romani populations in the Balkans carry South Asian Y chromosomes at rates up to 40%, while maternal mitochondrial DNA reveals extensive mixing with European host communities. These genetic maps trace their path through language gaps, Persian loanwords in Romani dialects marking their stay in Iran, Greek grammatical structures picked up in Byzantium. The science confirms what the culture has always known. Borders are temporary, but identity is portable. What makes the Roma experience universal is its reflection of all immigrant journeys. The way Andalusian gitano mothers teach daughters to dance with defiance in their heels, mirroring the pride of Japanese-American taiko drummers or Punjabi Bhangra crews. The way Romani activists today fight for census recognition, much like African Americans tracing roots through slavery's fractured records. Their story forces us to ask who gets to be from somewhere. Can a people with a millennium of European history still be called outsiders? As we turn from the Roma's epic journey to exploring your own ancestral paths, remember this: migration isn't just about crossing borders, it's about carrying worlds within you. Whether your family arrived last year or 10 generations ago, their steps left traces in recipes, sayings, and the very cadence of your speech. Uncovering those trails might lead you to unexpected places. A great-grandmother's village now part of another country, a surname that's been misspelled at borders for centuries, or even a shared melody that bridges continents and centuries. The tools to map these journeys have never been more powerful or more revealing. Tracing your family's journey through time is like piecing together a mosaic where every fragment tells a story, not just of names and dates, but of resilience and reinvention. Those glossy ads for DNA kits promise to unveil your ancestry with a simple cheek swab, but the real magic happens when you dive deeper. Imagine holding a brittle ship manifest from 1892, your great-grandmother's name scrawled in fading ink alongside other hopeful travelers listed as occupation, laborer, or last residence, village near Minsk. These documents are more than records. They're portals to moments of courage when someone stood on a dock with everything they owned in a single suitcase, betting on a future they couldn't yet see. Oral histories add color to these black and white facts. Your abuela's offhand remark about her childhood home having a courtyard with lemon trees might lead you to Sicilian property records, revealing generations of citrus growers. A grandfather's tale about stitching shoes in a tenement workshop could connect to industrial archives showing how Eastern European cobblers transformed America's garment districts. These aren't just anecdotes, they're living threads tying you to broader patterns, like how the spread of a surname like Kovacs, Hungarian for Smith, mirrors medieval trade routes where metalworkers followed demand across kingdoms. Local archives hold unexpected treasures. A church ledger in Puerto Rico might list your ancestors as libres de color, free people of color navigating a colonial world, while a faded photo from Johannesburg reveals a great-uncle's general store serving both Zulu miners and British clerks. Sometimes the clues are tactile. A quilt pattern passed down for generations might share motifs with West African textiles, or a recipe for grandma's special cookies could trace back to Sephardic Jewish traditions preserved through secrecy. But be prepared for surprises. That Irish branch of your family tree might lead to an ancestor who was actually an indentured servant from Barbados, their story tangled in the brutal calculus of empire. Or your DNA results could reveal a great-great-grandparent from a community you never knew existed, like the Afro-Turks of Izmir or the Chinese Peruvians of Lima. These complexities aren't flaws in your genealogy, they're proof that migration has always been messy, unpredictable, and deeply human. Why does this detective work matter today? Because understanding how your ancestors navigated borders, whether by choice or force, transforms history from abstract dates into a mirror. When you discover your great-great-aunt was turned away at Ellis Island for trachoma, only to try again months later with a borrowed passport, her determination echoes in today's asylum seekers. Tracing how your family's traditional embroidery evolved across 3 countries reminds us that cultures aren't static, but living things that grow through exchange. The most powerful realization, your existence is the culmination of countless unlikely survivals, plagues dodged, wars endured, languages relearned. That truth doesn't just connect you to the past, it reshapes how you move through the present. Every time you pass down a story, preserve a recipe, or even question the gaps in your family's narrative, you're adding another stitch to the vast, invisible tapestry of human movement, one that keeps unraveling and reweaving itself across generations. Border tensions and cultural clashes feel like modern dilemmas, but the ancient world wrestled with these same forces, just without smartphones and social media. Take those resourceful Phoenician traders navigating hostile ports 3,000 years ago. Archaeologists have uncovered clay tablets from Ugarit detailing import taxes so steep they'd make a modern customs officer blush. 20% levies on cedar wood, tariffs on purple dye shipments. Sound familiar? Even the Sogdians, those Silk Road connectors we met earlier, carried something eerily like passports, sealed wooden tallies inscribed with traveler details, broken open and inspected at each frontier. The anxiety of crossing borders with your livelihood in a bundle isn't a 21st century invention. It's as old as the first walled city. What's startling are the parallels in innovation. Just as Phoenician glass-blowing techniques revolutionized Mediterranean art, today's immigrant-founded startups account for over half of America's billion-dollar tech companies. The same spark that drove a Bantu blacksmith to adapt iron smelting across Africa now fuels a Nigerian engineer optimizing solar grids in Berlin. History's greatest leaps often come from those straddling worlds, like the medieval Moorish scholars of Al-Andalus who blended Greek philosophy with Islamic medicine, laying groundwork for the Renaissance. Their modern counterparts might be the Latinx coders blending Spanglish into AI voice recognition, or the Syrian chefs reinventing Berlin's food scene with za'atar-spiced fusion dishes. Yet the backlash follows a wearyingly similar script. Roman satirists mocked Easternized citizens for eating exotic dates instead of honest Roman bread, a first-century version of complaining about foreigners stealing jobs. Tang dynasty officials fretted that Persian merchants in Chang'an were corrupting local customs with their garish silks, much like today's panic over cultural dilution. The difference: we now have archaeological proof that these very interactions birthed enduring marvels: the Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara, the jazz born from West African rhythms meeting European instruments. Fear of change isn't new. Resisting it means missing the next renaissance. Here's where ancient wisdom offers unexpected solace. The multicultural port of Ostia Antiqua near Rome thrived precisely because it had systems to integrate newcomers, linguistic mediators, hybrid temples where Egyptian Isis and Roman Jupiter shared altars. Modern Montreal's success with bilingualism or Dubai's experiment in global neighborhood zoning aren't radical experiments. They're rediscovering what caravan cities knew millennia ago. Diversity works when it's structured, not suppressed. Even the much maligned brain drain has precedents. Byzantine emperors lured away Persian silk weavers with tax breaks, just as Canada fast-tracks visas for Silicon Valley engineers. The most poignant continuity lies in the personal stakes. A cuneiform letter from a stranded Assyrian merchant begging his wife for news of their sick child mirrors the WhatsApp messages of today's migrant workers. A Viking runestone in Sweden commemorates a son who died far west in Cirkland, leaving parents grieving across an uncrossable sea, no different from the Guatemalan mother lighting candles for a child lost crossing the Sonoran Desert. These aren't abstract policy debates, they're human stories echoing across epochs. So next time someone claims globalization is unraveling society, remind them the Phoenicians had branch offices in Cadiz, the Polynesians maintained a trans-Pacific trade network, and the Mongols enforced free movement across continents. The real anomaly isn't our interconnected age, but the brief historical blip of nationalism that tried and failed to wall off cultures from one another. What we're witnessing isn't collapse, but a return to humanity's oldest norm: borders that breathe, blend, and occasionally spark something brilliant. Now, about those persistent myths, like the idea that ancient migrations were peaceful compared to today's chaos. Let's unpack why that's not just wrong, but dangerously simplistic. The truth, as always, lies in the layers. The idea of a pure culture untouched by outside influence is as mythical as Atlantis, seductive but crumbling under scrutiny. Consider the so-called barbarians at Rome's gates. The Visigoths who sacked the city in 410 CE weren't mindless hordes, but sophisticated federations with legal codes and metallurgy skills rivaling the empire's. Their infamous leader Alaric had served as a Roman general before turning against his employers, blending military tactics from both worlds. Even the term barbarian itself was a linguistic quirk. The Greeks coined it to mock how foreigners' speech sounded like nonsensical bar noises, not a factual description of backwardness. Pop culture loves to flatten these nuances into simple tropes. Take those horned Viking helmets plastered on everything from cereal boxes to football logos. Not a single archaeological dig has ever unearthed one in Scandinavia. The myth traces back to a 19th century opera costume designer's dramatic flair. Real Norse headgear was practical iron or leather, often influenced by Slavic and Frankish designs they encountered through trade. This romanticized violence obscures their quieter achievements. Viking Age merchants established trade networks stretching from Baghdad to Newfoundland, while their legal assemblies laid groundwork for modern parliamentary systems. The real game changer in debunking these myths, science, isotopic analysis of teeth enamel, now lets us track an individual's movement from childhood to grave. A warrior buried with Celtic talks in Britain might have isotopic signatures matching the Hungarian plains, while a Roman skeleton in York could reveal North African ancestry. These findings explode the outdated notion that ancient peoples stayed put. Genetic studies show the average Briton today carries DNA from at least 3 major migration waves before the Norman conquest. Even language betrays this constant mingling. English isn't just Germanic with Latin sprinkles, but a simmering stew of Celtic substrate, Norse syntax, and French vocabulary. What's emerging is a picture of perpetual cultural negotiation. The Mongols weren't just destroyers, their Pax Mongolica enabled Marco Polo's travels and sparked exchanges between Persian astronomers and Chinese mathematicians. The Dark Ages after Rome's fall saw vibrant innovation. Syrian glassmakers resettling in Francia, Byzantine silk weavers teaching Italians, and Jewish merchants bridging Christian and Islamic worlds. Resistance to change was equally universal. Byzantine emperors banned silk imports to protect local weavers, much like modern tariffs, but the tide of exchange always won. This isn't just academic correction, it's a vital lens for today. When politicians invoke timeless national identities, they ignore how even iconic symbols are hybrids. The Japanese kimono evolved from Tang Dynasty Chinese robes, while the traditional Scottish kilt was popularized by an English industrialist. Recognizing ancient mobility helps dismantle toxic myths of racial purity. DNA confirms that the Yamnaya steppe herders who spread Indo-European languages carried genes from Siberian hunter-gatherers and Caucasian farmers. The takeaway: human history resembles less a collection of isolated stained glass windows than a sprawling mosaic, each piece distinct, but the beauty lies in their connections. As cutting-edge tools like paleogenomics and AI-assisted archaeology rewrite narratives weekly, we're learning that resilience rarely meant staying the same. It meant adapting, blending, and sometimes becoming something entirely new, like the Phoenician alphabet morphing into Greek, then Cyrillic, then the very letters bringing you these words. That's the untold epic, not of walls keeping cultures apart, but of bridges built by ordinary people, traders, parents, artisans, who carried fragments of their world into others, creating patterns more magnificent than they could have imagined. Legacy isn't just about the famous names etched in marble, it's the quiet persistence of ordinary people whose choices ripple across centuries. Take Emperor Elagabalus, that teenage ruler who scandalized Rome with Syrian sun rituals and pearl-dusted chariots. History paints him as an eccentric, but dig deeper. His reign marked the moment a Middle Eastern cult became mainstream in the empire's heart. Those temple stones he imported from Emesa weren't just foreign curiosities. They were fragments of a homeland carried across seas by someone too young to remember the scent of his birthplace's cedar trees. His story isn't just about cultural clash. It's proof that even the mightiest civilizations are reshaped by the marginalized. Now consider An Lushan, the Tang Dynasty general whose rebellion nearly toppled China's golden age. History books label him a traitor, but his backstory reveals something more profound. The son of a Sogdian merchant and a Turkic mother, he rose through a system that both relied on and distrusted outsiders. His very name, Lushan, meaning sparkling mountain, hints at the linguistic alchemy of immigrant identities, where foreign sounds are polished into local poetry. That a man of Central Asian roots could command Chinese armies speaks volumes about the Tang's cosmopolitanism and the unspoken tensions simmering beneath. These aren't just ancient footnotes, they're antidotes to modern fatalism. When we hear that languages vanish or traditions fade, we forget how often they re-emerge in disguise. The Roma people's Romani language, once banned across Europe, now fuels Grammy-winning flamenco lyrics. Yoruba spiritual terms, suppressed during the transatlantic slave trade, pulse through Caribbean Santeria chants and even modern hip-hop. Survival isn't always about preservation, sometimes it's about camouflage, like the way Persian New Year traditions resurfaced in Ottoman palace festivals, or how Native American corn recipes became colonial spoon bread. What's truly inspiring is the ordinary resilience, the unnamed parents who hummed lullabies in forbidden tongues, the artisans who hid ancestral patterns in modern designs. Archaeologists in Spain recently found 6th century Christian graves with hidden Zoroastrian-style amulets, proof that dual identities aren't a modern invention, but an ancient strategy. Similarly, the so-called hidden Christian villages of Japan maintained their faith through coded statues of the Virgin Mary, disguised as Buddhist canon figures for 250 years of persecution. These weren't acts of defiance so much as quiet insistence. You can take our symbols but not our stories. Reclaiming these narratives does more than correct the historical record, it rewires our sense of possibility. When a Tunisian immigrant's great-grandson becomes France's top pastry chef, or a Vietnamese refugee's daughter revolutionizes American literature, they're walking paths paved by Phoenician scribes and Bantu ironworkers. Migration isn't an exception to human history, it's the loom on which our collective fabric is woven. Every time we savor a dish, speak a word, or celebrate a festival with roots beyond our borders, we're honoring those countless journeyers who carried the future in their hands, often without knowing it. Their legacy isn't just in the grand monuments, but in the stubborn, beautiful truth that no culture ever truly disappears. It just learns new ways to shine. From Phoenician traders to Polynesian navigators, these hidden chronicles redefine what it means to belong. They reveal a truth as old as humanity itself. Cultures don't flourish in isolation, but through countless acts of exchange, sometimes voluntary, often forced, always transformative. Picture the threads connecting us across time. A shard of Roman glass traded for Baltic amber, a Sanskrit prayer whispered in a Sicilian marketplace, a single sweet potato vine carried across the Pacific's vast expanse. These aren't just artifacts, they're living proof that every society is a palimpsest, written and rewritten by the hands of newcomers. Look around you. That coffee steaming in your cup, its journey began in Ethiopian highlands, passed through Yemeni Sufi monasteries, and sparked Enlightenment debates in Viennese cafes. The melody stuck in your head. It might echo Andalusian guitar rhythms shaped by Arabic oud scales, or the syncopated beats enslaved Africans forged from remembered drum patterns. Even the language you're hearing now carries traces of Norman French, Viking Old Norse, and the Celtic tongues it largely replaced. We're all walking archives of forgotten crossings, our daily lives humming with the legacies of those who dared to carry their world with them. This isn't just about appreciating diversity, it's about recognizing our shared debt to mobility. When archaeologists unearthed a Viking sword with an Ulfbert inscription in a Swedish grave, its superior steel traced back to Iranian smelting techniques traded along the Volga. The stunning blue and white ceramics we call Ming actually married Chinese porcelain skills with Persian cobalt designs, creating an art form neither culture could have achieved alone. Even something as mundane as your morning shower relies on Roman aqueduct engineering, Arabic soap-making knowledge, and the indoor plumbing innovations of immigrant engineers in 19th century New York. Progress has always been a collaborative project, though history's credit rarely reflects it. So how do we honor these invisible architects? Start by questioning the myths of cultural purity. That traditional folk costume in your ancestral village, its embroidery likely borrowed motifs from passing Silk Road merchants, the authentic family recipe. Probably adapted when an ancestor swapped ingredients in a foreign port. These aren't betrayals of heritage, but its very essence, the creative friction that occurs when worlds collide and choose to learn from one another. As the camera pulls back, consider this. The same forces that shaped antiquity are rewriting our world right now. The Syrian refugee teaching Berliners how to bake kak bread rings continues a 12,000-year-old tradition of culinary exchange. The Congolese programmer blending Lingala proverbs into AI algorithms walks in the footsteps of Phoenician scribes who adapted alphabets for new tongues. Your own story, whatever its contours, belongs to this unbroken chain, a testament to someone, somewhere, who carried their light across dark waters. The past isn't a locked door, but 1,000 keys waiting in plain sight. Share in the comments what immigrant legacies you've discovered in your family's journey, a word, a tool, a story that bridges borders. Hit subscribe to keep unraveling history's best-kept secret, that every ending is really a beginning in disguise. Until next time, keep listening for the whispers of those who walked before you. They have so much left to say.